The grand mansion on Hillcrest Avenue stood as a monument to success. But for the man who lived inside, it had become nothing more than an elegant prison. Harold Bennett stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his study, watching rain streak down the glass as evening settled over the manicured grounds. At 67, he had everything money could buy and nothing that truly mattered. The room around him spoke of wealth, leather-bound books he no longer read, awards he no longer cared about, and photographs he could barely stand to look at. 3 years had passed since his wife Eleanor's death, and the house had grown quieter with each passing season. Harold's fingers drummed impatiently on the arm of his chair as he checked his platinum watch. The piano tutor was late. Again. Not that it mattered, the last two had been disappointments, and this one would likely be no different. At his age, learning to play was probably foolish anyway. But Eleanor had loved piano music, and in his lonelier moments, Harold had convinced himself that somehow, learning to create the sound she had loved might bring him closer to her memory. The doorbell finally rang, and Harold heard his housekeeper's footsteps in the hallway. Moments later, a young man with an eager smile and nervous eyes appeared at the study door. "Mr. Bennett? I'm Thomas Ward, your new piano instructor." The young man extended his hand. Harold nodded curtly without taking it. "You're 20 minutes late." "I apologize, sir. The traffic was... I don't particularly care about the traffic." Harold stood up, his tall frame still imposing despite the slight stoop of age. "The music room is this way." The lesson that followed was painful for both of them. Harold's fingers felt stiff and uncooperative on the keys. The simple scales that Thomas tried to teach him sounded clumsy and wrong. After 40 frustrating minutes, Harold slammed the key cover down, nearly catching the tutor's fingers. "This isn't working," he said flatly. Thomas looked bewildered. "Sir, learning piano takes time. Everyone struggles at first." "I'm not everyone, young man. I built a technology empire from nothing. I revolutionized telecommunications. I don't struggle with things." "With respect, Mr. Bennett, music isn't like business. It requires patience. And what it requires," Harold interrupted, "is talent, which I evidently lack and you cannot teach." He reached for his checkbook. "How much do I owe you for today's lesson?" Thomas looked uncomfortable. "We agreed on $75 per hour, but since we didn't complete..." Harold scribbled on the check and tore it off. "Here's $200 for your time and trouble. We won't be continuing." The young man tried once more. "Mr. Bennett, if you'd just give it another week or two..." "Thank you for your time, Mr. Ward." Harold's tone made it clear the conversation was over. "Mrs. Rivera will show you out." As if summoned by her name, Sophia Rivera appeared in the doorway. At 58, she moved with the quiet efficiency that had made her invaluable to the Bennett household for 15 years. Her dark hair was streaked with silver and pulled back in a neat bun, and her observant eyes missed nothing. "This way, please," she said to the defeated piano teacher, who followed her from the room with a last bewildered glance at Harold. Harold returned to the window, watching darkness settle over the garden. That was the third piano tutor he'd dismissed in a month. Eleanor would have been disappointed in him. She never gave up on anything. But then, she'd had a natural grace that he'd always lacked. The soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he called, not turning around. "Will there be anything else this evening, Mr. Bennett?" Sophia asked. Harold turned to face her. "That will be all, Mrs. Rivera. And please cancel any future piano instructors. I'm done with the whole ridiculous endeavor." Instead of nodding and retreating as she usually did, Sophia remained in the doorway, her expression thoughtful. "Is there something else?" Harold asked, irritation creeping into his voice. "May I speak freely, sir?" The request surprised him. In 15 years, Sophia had rarely offered unsolicited opinions. She simply made his life run smoothly, anticipating needs before he expressed them. "Go ahead," he said, curiosity temporarily overriding his foul mood. "Perhaps you're approaching this the wrong way," she said carefully. Harold raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" "You don't need to learn to play piano yourself. There are many talented musicians who would be happy to play for you." You could have live music in this house again. The suggestion struck a nerve. Eleanor had often invited musicians to play at their dinner parties. The house had been full of music and laughter then. "I don't want strangers in my house," he said, flatly. "Then perhaps recordings? I could update your music collection with—" "I have tried recordings," Harold interrupted, more sharply than he intended. "They're not the same. They're empty." Sophia nodded, accepting the rejection without offense. "Of course, sir. I apologize for overstepping." Harold sighed, suddenly feeling the weight of his years. "No need to apologize, Mrs. Rivera. I know. You're trying to help." He walked over to the small bar in the corner of his study and poured himself 2 fingers of scotch. "Do you know why I wanted to learn piano?" "For Mrs. Bennet?" Sophia suggested softly. Harold nodded, staring into the amber liquid in his glass. Eleanor loved music. It made her laugh, really laugh, when something delighted her. He took a sip of his drink. "Do you know I can't remember the last time I laughed? Really laughed, not just the polite chuckle you give at business dinners." "It's been a difficult few years," Sophia acknowledged. 3 years, 4 months, and 16 days. Harold said quietly. "That's how long it's been since I heard Eleanor laugh." He set his glass down with a decisive click. "That's what I want, Mrs. Rivera. Not lessons, not recordings, not some stranger performing in my house. I want to hear something that will make me laugh again. That will make me feel something other than this." He gestured vaguely at the empty room. Sophia regarded him with an expression he couldn't quite read. In the dim light of the study, he noticed for the first time the fine lines around her eyes, the dignity in her posture. She had been with them through Eleanor's illness, through the worst days. She had seen him at his lowest, and had never judged, never pitied. "I understand," she said finally. "No, you don't," Harold replied, not unkindly. "No one can. Perhaps not entirely," she conceded. "But I do understand loneliness, Mr. Bennet." The simple statement hung in the air between them. Harold found himself wondering about Sophia's life outside these walls. He realized with a pang of shame that he had never asked. "Well," he said awkwardly, "it's getting late. You should go home, Mrs. Rivera." "Yes, sir." She turned to leave, then paused. "Mr. Bennet?" "Yes?" Sometimes the things we're looking for come from unexpected places. Before he could ask what she meant, she was gone, closing the door quietly behind her. Harold stood alone in the study, her words echoing strangely in his mind. After a moment, he shook his head and returned to his drink. Philosophical housekeepers. What next? Later that night, as Harold prepared for bed in his 2 large master suite, he heard the faint sound of the front door closing. Sophia leaving for the day. He found himself wondering about her comment. There had been something in her eyes, a fleeting look that suggested she knew more than she was saying. He dismissed the thought. She was simply being kind, trying to offer comfort in her own way. Still, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Harold couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in their usual dynamic. "Play the piano. I want to laugh," he murmured to the empty room, echoing his earlier complaint. The words sounded petulant even to his own ears. Eleanor would have called him a grumpy old bear and somehow made him smile about it. But Eleanor was gone, and Harold was left with only her memory and a house full of things that no longer brought him joy. As sleep finally claimed him, his last conscious thought was that tomorrow would be just like today. Another empty day and a string of empty days stretching before him like a prison sentence. He could not have known how wrong he was, or that his housekeeper was about to shatter his expectations in ways he could never have imagined. Harold woke earlier than usual the next morning. Pale sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across his bedroom floor. The rain had stopped overnight, leaving behind that fresh, clean smell that always reminded him of new beginnings. Not that he believed in such things anymore. He lay still for a moment, listening to the quiet of the house. Then he heard it, so faint he almost thought he was dreaming. Music. piano music drifting up from somewhere downstairs. Harold sat up, frowning. Had he forgotten to cancel another appointment with a piano teacher? No, he specifically remembered telling Sophia to cancel any future lessons. Perhaps it was the television, though he couldn't remember the last time anyone had used the entertainment system in the morning. Curiosity pulled him from bed. He pulled on his robe and slippers and made his way downstairs, following the sound. The music grew clearer as he approached the rarely used music room. It was a lively, bouncing tune. Ragtime, if he remembered correctly. Eleanor had loved Scott Joplin. The door to the music room was partially open. Harold peered in, expecting to see a stranger. Perhaps one of the staff had brought a guest. Instead, he froze in disbelief. Sophia sat at his grand piano, her back straight, her hands dancing over the keys with remarkable skill and confidence. Her eyes were closed, a small smile playing on her lips as her fingers coaxed the cheerful melody from the instrument. She swayed slightly with the rhythm, completely lost in the music. Harold stood transfixed. This was his housekeeper of 15 years, the woman who quietly managed his household, who knew exactly how he liked his coffee and shirts pressed, who had seen him through the darkest days after Eleanor's death. And here she was, playing with the skill of a professional. As the piece reached its conclusion, Sophia's fingers slowed, drawing out the final notes with obvious affection. The last note hung in the air for a moment before fading to silence. That was the entertainer, Harold said, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Sophia's eyes flew open. She turned quickly, rising from the bench. "Mr. Bennett, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize you were awake." "Clearly," Harold said, stepping fully into the room. "What I don't understand is why my housekeeper is playing my piano at 6 in the morning, or why she can play at all for that matter." A flush crept up Sophia's neck. "I apologize for the intrusion, sir. I was dusting in here and just... It's been a while since I played. I shouldn't have taken the liberty." Harold moved closer, studying her with new eyes. "You play remarkably well for someone who was just dusting." Sophia smoothed her hands down her simple black dress, her unofficial uniform, and seemed to gather herself. "Thank you, sir. I should get back to my duties. Your breakfast will be ready in 20 minutes. Wait." Harold held up a hand. "You don't get to drop this bombshell and then go scramble eggs as if nothing happened." He gestured to the piano bench. "Sit down, Mrs. Rivera, please." Sophia hesitated, then slowly sat back down on the edge of the bench. Harold took a seat in the armchair nearest the piano. "Now," he said, "explain." Sophia's hands twisted in her lap. "There's not much to explain, sir. I used to play. Before." "Before what?" "Before life took a different turn." She glanced up at him, then back at her hands. "I studied piano in college. I was quite good, actually. My professors thought I had potential for a career in performance." Harold leaned forward. "So why are you dusting my house instead of playing in concert halls?" The question came out more harshly than he'd intended. But Sophia didn't flinch. "My father got sick my junior year. Lung cancer. We had no money for treatment, no insurance. I dropped out to care for him and work full-time." Her voice was matter-of-fact, free of self-pity. "After he passed, there were debts to pay. By then, going back to school seemed impossible. But you kept playing," Harold said. "It wasn't a question." A small smile touched Sophia's lips. "When I could. I worked at a church for a while. They let me practice on their piano. Then later I cleaned houses for a piano teacher who let me use her instrument when she didn't have students." She looked around the beautiful room. "I haven't had regular access to a piano in nearly 7 years, since before I came to work for you and Mrs. Bennett." Harold felt a strange twist of guilt. A grand piano worth more than most cars had sat unused in his home while the woman who cleaned his house, a talented musician, had gone without. "Why didn't you ever mention this? Eleanor would have been thrilled to know you played. She would have insisted you use the piano." Sophia's smile turned sad. "Mrs. Bennett did know, actually. She found me playing once, much like you did today. Eleanor knew? Harold was stunned. She never told me. I asked her not to, Sophia admitted. I wanted to keep my personal life separate from my work. It seemed simpler that way. And yet she let you play. Sophia nodded. Sometimes when you were traveling for business, she would ask me to play for her. She loved music so much. She paused, her eyes growing distant with memory. The last time was about a week before she went into the hospital for the final time. She was having a good day. We sat in here for nearly 2 hours while I played all her favorites. Harold felt his throat tighten. He could picture it perfectly. Eleanor sitting exactly where he was now, her face lit up with pleasure as music filled the room, while he had been away on some business trip that now seemed completely meaningless. Why today? He asked, forcing the words past the lump in his throat. Why play today, after all this time? Sophia met his eyes directly for the first time. Because of what you said yesterday, about wanting to laugh again, about wanting to feel something. She hesitated. I thought perhaps I could help in my own way. By playing ragtime at dawn. Despite himself, Harold felt the corner of his mouth twitch upward. It seemed like a place to start, she replied with a small shrug. Scott Joplin isn't particularly subtle, but he's hard to ignore. Harold studied his housekeeper with growing curiosity. In 15 years, they had maintained a cordial but distant employer-employee relationship. He had never imagined there might be hidden depths to the quiet woman who ran his household. Play something else, he said suddenly. Sophia blinked in surprise. Now, sir? Yes, now, if you don't mind. He settled back in the chair. Consider it part of your duties today. A brief look of uncertainty crossed her face, but then she turned to the piano, her hands hovering over the keys for a moment as she decided what to play. Then her fingers descended and the room filled with a gentle, flowing melody, something classical that Harold vaguely recognized but couldn't name. As she played, Harold watched her transformation. The reserved housekeeper disappeared, replaced by an artist fully engaged in her craft. Her face softened, the professional mask falling away to reveal genuine emotion. Her body moved with the music, leaning into crescendos, pulling back for softer passages. She was, he realized with something like wonder, truly talented. When the piece ended, she turned to him with a questioning look. Chopin, Harold said. Eleanor was fond of him. Sophia nodded. Nocturne in E-flat major, one of her favorites. A silence fell between them, not entirely uncomfortable but charged with something new. A shift in understanding, perhaps. Mrs. Rivera, Harold said finally, I believe I've been underutilizing your talents. Sir, I spent a small fortune on piano tutors last month, when apparently I had a concert pianist serving my breakfast. Hardly a concert pianist, she protested, but a pleased flush colored her cheeks. Nevertheless, Harold stood up, decision made. I have a proposition for you. Sophia waited, her hands folded in her lap once more, the professional mask sliding back into place. I would like to hire you, separately from your housekeeping duties, to play for me. In the evenings, perhaps. After dinner. Surprise flickered across her face. You want me to perform for you? Is that so strange? You just said you used to play for Eleanor. That was different. We were friends in a way. The comment stung more than it should have. And we are employer and employee, Harold acknowledged stiffly. Which is why I'm offering to pay you for your time, professionally. Sophia stood up, smoothing her dress again in a gesture he now recognized as a nervous habit. Mr. Bennett, I appreciate the offer, but name your price, he interrupted. Whatever those piano tutors were charging, I'll double it. It's not about money, she said quietly. Then what is it about? Sophia seemed to consider her words carefully. Music isn't just a skill, Mr. Bennett. It's a form of communication, of connection. She gestured to the piano. When I play, I'm sharing something of myself. I'm not sure that's something that can be purchased. Harold felt his face grow warm. I didn't mean to suggest. He stopped, frustrated. Look, you play beautifully. I enjoyed listening. I thought perhaps we might both benefit from an arrangement. That's all. Sophia studied him for a long moment. Then, to his surprise, she nodded. All right, I'll play for you. But I have conditions of my own. Harold raised an eyebrow. Conditions? This isn't a negotiation, Mrs. Rivera. Actually, sir, it is. Something had changed in Sophia's demeanor. She stood straighter, spoke with quiet confidence. If I'm to play for you as a musician rather than as your housekeeper, then we need to establish some boundaries. Harold found himself both irritated and intrigued by this new side of Sophia. Very well, what are these conditions? First, I'll play 3 evenings a week for 1 hour each session after my regular duties are complete. Harold nodded. Acceptable. Second, I choose what I play. This gave him pause. The whole point was for you to play something that might make me laugh. And I'll certainly try, Sophia assured him. But music isn't just about laughter, Mr. Bennett. It's about experiencing the full range of human emotions. If you truly want to feel something again, you need to be open to all of it, not just the happy parts. Harold frowned. I've had enough sadness to last a lifetime, thank you very much. I understand that. But joy means more when it's part of a complete emotional life. Sophia's voice softened. Mrs. Bennett understood that. She loved the happier pieces, but she also appreciated the depth of the more melancholy ones. The mention of Eleanor made Harold's protest die in his throat. She had indeed loved all kinds of music, often saying that a good cry during a beautiful piece was as refreshing as a laugh during a lively one. Fine, he conceded. You choose the music. What else? Last condition. You'll tell me if something resonates with you, good or bad. No sitting there like a statue. This isn't a formal recital, it's a conversation of sorts. Harold huffed. You expect me to provide commentary? Not exactly, just honest reactions. Otherwise, I'm just a human jukebox and neither of us will get much from the experience. Harold considered the terms. They were reasonable enough, if somewhat presumptuous. But something still bothered him. You haven't mentioned payment, Sophia hesitated. Your regular rate for the piano tutors will be fine. That seems insufficient for someone with your training. It's more than fair, she insisted, especially since I'll be using your piano, in your home, on your time. Harold sensed there was something she wasn't saying. There's another condition, isn't there? Something you're holding back. Sophia looked away, then met his eyes with quiet determination. Just one small request. If I do this, if I play for you, I'd like permission to use the piano occasionally for myself. Early mornings, perhaps before you wake or on my days off. Understanding dawned. You miss it, Harold said. Playing regularly. More than I realized, she admitted. This morning was the first time I've played in nearly 7 years, and it felt like coming home. Something in her voice struck a chord in Harold. He knew what it was to lose something essential to your soul. He'd felt that way since Eleanor died, like a vital part of himself had been buried with her. Use the piano whenever you wish, he said, surprising himself with the generosity of the offer. It's not doing anyone any good sitting here gathering dust. Relief and gratitude washed over Sophia's face. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. When do we start this arrangement? He asked. Tonight, she suggested. After dinner? Harold nodded. Tonight it is. Dinner that evening was the same perfectly prepared meal Sophia always made, served in the same immaculate dining room where Harold had eaten alone for the past 3 years. But something felt different. There was an anticipation in the air, a sense of possibility that had been absent from the house for too long. Harold found himself eating more quickly than usual, glancing at the clock. When Sophia came to clear his plate, he waved her away. Leave the dishes. We have an appointment, I believe. A small smile touched her lips. Yes, sir. Shall we use the music room? Harold followed her down the hallway, feeling oddly nervous. This had been his idea, after all, yet he felt like a guest in his own home. The music room looked different in the evening light. Sophia had opened the heavy curtains to reveal the garden beyond, now bathed in the golden glow of sunset. She'd turned on just a few lamps, creating a warm, intimate atmosphere. Where would you like to sit? She asked. Harold chose the comfortable armchair nearest the piano, the same one he'd sat in that morning. Sophia took her place at the bench, adjusting its height with practiced ease. Any request to start? She asked, her hands poised above the keys. You're the expert, Harold replied. Surprise me. Sophia nodded and began to play. The piece started softly, almost tentatively, with a simple melody that gradually built in complexity. It wasn't classical exactly, nor was it the bouncy ragtime from that morning. It had elements of jazz, but something more too. A modern composition that somehow felt timeless. Harold found himself leaning forward, drawn in by the unexpected choice. The melody was wistful without being sad, hopeful without being naively cheerful. As it developed, little moments of unexpected harmony brought smiles of surprise, like finding hidden treasures within the piece. When Sophia finished, her hands resting quietly on the keys, Harold realized he'd been holding his breath. That was not what I expected, he said. What was it? Something I composed years ago. Sophia looked slightly embarrassed. I hope you don't mind. I thought it might be a good way to start, something without associations for either of us. You wrote that? Harold couldn't hide his surprise. It was quite good. Thank you. She seemed pleased by the simple compliment. I used to compose quite a bit. That piece is called Beginning Again. The title felt appropriate in ways Harold wasn't ready to examine. What else do you have in your repertoire? For the next 45 minutes, Sophia played a carefully chosen selection, a playful Mozart piece that showed off her technical skill, a George Gershwin tune that blurred the lines between classical and jazz, and a folk melody that she'd arranged herself. Each piece revealed another facet of her talent and personality. Harold found himself relaxing, truly enjoying music for the first time since Eleanor's death. He wasn't laughing yet, but he was engaged, present in the moment rather than lost, in grief or numbed by routine. As their agreed-upon hour drew to a close, Sophia turned to him. One more? Harold nodded. Please. She began a piece he recognized immediately, one of Eleanor's absolute favorites, a Debussy composition that seemed to capture the movement of water and light. Harold felt his chest tighten. He'd avoided this music since her death, finding it too painful to hear the pieces she had loved. His first instinct was to ask Sophia to stop, but he remembered their agreement. He was to give honest reactions. And honestly, beneath the initial pain of remembrance, there was something else. A bittersweet pleasure in connecting with Eleanor's memory through the music she had cherished. When Sophia finished, she looked at him with concern. Too much? Harold cleared his throat. No, he said quietly. It was perfect, actually. Eleanor would have loved your interpretation. She did, Sophia said softly. It was one of the last pieces I played for her. A comfortable silence fell between them. Finally, Harold stood. Thank you for this evening, Mrs. Rivera. You've more than fulfilled your side of our bargain. Did any of it make you laugh? She asked. Harold considered the question. Not quite, but it made me feel more alive than I have in months. That's something, isn't it? Sophia smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. It's quite a lot, actually. Same time Thursday? He asked. I'll be here. She closed the piano gently. Good night, Mr. Bennett. Over the next few weeks, their musical evenings settled into a pleasant routine. 3 times a week after Sophia finished her housekeeping duties, they would meet in the music room. Sometimes Harold would request specific pieces, Other times he would let Sophia surprise him. The household staff noticed the change in their employer. The perpetual scowl that had become his default expression began to soften. He started taking meals in the dining room again rather than his study. Once, the cook even heard him humming, badly but humming nonetheless as he read the morning paper. Sophia, too, seemed transformed. The other staff members reported hearing the piano early in the mornings, before the household was properly awake. She moved through her duties with a new lightness as if a burden had been lifted. But for all the positive changes, Harold still hadn't laughed. He'd smiled, nodded in appreciation, even tapped his foot to the more rhythmic pieces. But the deep, genuine laughter that Sophia was hoping for remained elusive, until one rainy Tuesday evening, exactly 1 month after their arrangement began. Sophia had just finished a particularly moving Chopin piece when Harold surprised her with a question. "Did you ever teach?" "Piano, I mean." Sophia looked up. "A little. Why do you ask?" Harold shifted in his seat, suddenly looking uncomfortable. "I was wondering if perhaps, that is, if you wouldn't mind." Understanding dawned on Sophia's face. "Mr. Bennett, are you asking if I would teach you to play?" The great Harold Bennett, technology pioneer and business titan, actually blushed. "It seems silly at my age, I know, but watching you these past weeks has made me think that perhaps I gave up too easily." Sophia's expression softened. It's never too late to learn something new, even for a grumpy old man with arthritic fingers. "Especially for him," she replied with a smile. "We'll start with the basics, just simple scales." "God help us both," Harold muttered, but he moved to join her on the bench. The first lesson was, as Harold had predicted, something of a disaster. His fingers fumbled over even the simplest scales, and his frustration mounted with each mistake. "This is hopeless," he growled after a particularly mangled attempt. "My hands don't work that way." Sophia remained patient. "No one plays well at first, Mr. Bennett. Not even Mozart." "I doubt Mozart ever sounded like a cat walking across the keys," Harold grumbled. "Actually, when he was very young, I imagine, he did." Sophia demonstrated the scale again, her fingers flowing smoothly over the keys. "The difference is," he kept trying. Harold shot her a look. "Are you suggesting I lack perseverance, Mrs. Rivera?" "Not at all," she replied calmly. "I'm suggesting you're being too hard on yourself. You built an empire, but I imagine you didn't do that overnight either." The observation caught Harold off guard. He thought back to the early days of his company, the failures, the setbacks, the countless hours of work before success finally came. "Fair point," he conceded. "But I was much younger then, and considerably more patient." "Age has nothing to do with learning something new," Sophia insisted. "My grandmother learned to read at 73. My uncle took up painting at 68. The only real obstacle is believing you can't do it." Harold eyed her suspiciously. "When did you become so wise?" "I don't recall philosophical discussions. Being part of your housekeeping duties." A smile tugged at Sophia's lips. "Perhaps you never asked the right questions." Despite his frustration, Harold found himself chuckling, a rusty sound he barely recognized as his own. Sophia's eyes widened, slightly in surprise, then crinkled with pleasure. "Was that a laugh I heard, Mr. Bennett?" Harold cleared his throat, suddenly self-conscious. "A momentary lapse in judgment, don't get used to it." But something had shifted. That small chuckle, brief as it was, had cracked open a door long shut. As the weeks passed, their routine expanded. 3 evenings a week Sophia would play for an hour, filling the house with music that gradually grew more adventurous as she gauged Harold's responses. Then, twice a week, she would attempt to teach him the basics of piano playing. Progress was slow but steady. Harold's fingers gradually became more cooperative and his ear more attuned to the subtleties of the music. He was never going to be a virtuoso, not even a particularly competent amateur. But he found an unexpected satisfaction in mastering even the simplest pieces. More surprising was how their conversations evolved. What had begun as formal exchanges Between employer and employee gradually relaxed into something approaching friendship. Harold learned that Sophia had grown up in a small apartment above her parents' grocery store, that she had a brother who taught physics at a university in California, that she loved spicy food and mystery novels and autumn rain. In turn, he found himself sharing stories he hadn't told in years about his humble beginnings, his early business failures, the first time he met Eleanor at a charity auction where they had both bid on the same painting. Who won? Sophia asked one evening as they sat in the music room after her performance, something that had become a regular part of their sessions. The painting? Neither of us. Some oil tycoon outbid us both. Harold smiled at the memory. But I asked Eleanor to dinner to console ourselves over our mutual loss, and well, I'd say I came out ahead in the end. She was an extraordinary woman, Sophia said softly. Yes, she was. The familiar pang of loss was there, but it had softened somehow, mellowed into something bittersweet rather than purely painful. She would have enjoyed these evenings, I think. I think so too. As autumn deepened into winter, the household staff exchanged meaningful glances at the changes in their employer. The harsh demands had become polite requests. The perpetual frown had given way to a more thoughtful expression. Once, the young gardener even reported hearing Mr. Bennet whistling as he walked through the garden. Most telling was the way he began to engage with the household around him. He started taking breakfast in the kitchen rather than his study, chatting with the cook about her grandchildren. He asked the gardener's advice about replanting part of the rose garden that Eleanor had loved. He remembered the driver's birthday and gave him tickets to a baseball game. It was as if the music had awakened not just Harold's capacity for joy, but his awareness of the people who had been around him all along. One snowy evening in December, as Harold struggled through a simple Christmas carol under Sophia's guidance, the housekeeper made a suggestion. Perhaps we could invite some of the staff to a small holiday gathering, she ventured. You could play this piece for them. Harold's fingers froze over the keys. Perform? In front of people? Absolutely not. It wouldn't be a performance exactly, Sophia said carefully. More of a friendly sharing. This house hasn't had a proper Christmas celebration since Mrs. Bennet passed. Harold was about to refuse outright when he caught sight of a photograph. On the wall, Eleanor at the piano during their last Christmas party, her face alight with laughter as guests gathered around singing carols. She had loved the holidays, loved filling the house with people and music and warmth. I would make a fool of myself, he said, but his tone had softened. I doubt that very much, Sophia replied. Besides, these people have seen you at your worst over the past 3 years. A few wrong notes aren't likely to lower their opinion. Harold winced at the frank assessment. Have I really been that terrible? Sophia considered her words carefully. Grief changes people, Mr. Bennet. The staff understood that. But kindness cost nothing, and its absence was noticed. The simple truth hit Harold harder than he expected. He had been so consumed by his own pain that he had never considered how his behavior affected those around him, people who had shown nothing but loyalty during the darkest period of his life. You're right, he said quietly. A small gathering might be appropriate. Sophia's surprise at his agreement was evident, but she recovered quickly. Shall I make the arrangements? Please do. Nothing elaborate, just the household staff and perhaps a few simple refreshments. The simple gathering, under Sophia's guidance, evolved into a warm, festive evening. The rarely used living room was decorated with evergreen boughs and twinkling lights. A fire blazed in the hearth. The cook outdid herself with a spread of holiday treats, and the normally formal dining room table was transformed with a cheerful red tablecloth and candles. The staff arrived dressed in their Sunday best, clearly nervous at first to be socializing in the home they usually maintained. But Harold made an effort to put them at ease, asking about their families and holiday plans with genuine interest. After everyone had eaten and the initial awkwardness had faded, Sophia quietly took her place at the piano. She played a few traditional carols, her skilled hands bringing the familiar tunes to life. The staff listened appreciatively, some softly singing along. Then came the moment Harold had been dreading. Sophia caught his eye and nodded encouragingly. With a deep breath, he rose from his chair and joined her at the piano bench. "I should warn you all," he said to the small gathering, "that what you're about to hear may cause you to reconsider your employment." A ripple of surprised laughter went through the room, not at the joke itself, which was admittedly weak, but at the fact that Mr. Bennet had made a joke at all. Harold placed his hands on the keys, trying to remember everything Sophia had taught him. The first few notes were hesitant, uncertain. But then muscle memory took over, and the simple melody of Silent Night emerged recognizably, if not perfectly, from the piano. When he finished, the small audience burst into genuine applause. Harold felt his face grow warm with a mixture of embarrassment and pleasure. "That was lovely, Mr. Bennet," the cook said, her eyes suspiciously bright. "Kind of you to say so, Mrs. Chen, though we both know it was barely adequate." Harold turned to Sophia. "Perhaps we should give them some real music now?" Sophia smiled and began to play again, this time a livelier piece that had toes tapping. Within seconds, to everyone's astonishment, including his own, Harold began to sing along, his deep baritone rusty from disuse but still strong. Others joined in, and soon the room was filled with music and laughter. In that moment, with snow falling gently outside and warmth surrounding him, Harold felt something he had thought lost forever, a sense of belonging, of connection, of home. Later, after the guests had departed and Sophia was tidying up the last few dishes, Harold found her in the kitchen. "Thank you," he said simply. "That was unexpectedly wonderful." Sophia looked up, her eyes warm. "You're welcome, Mr. Bennet. It was good to hear you laugh again." Harold blinked in surprise. "Did I laugh? I don't even remember." "Several times," she confirmed. "Real laughter, the kind that comes from joy, not politeness." Harold realized she was right. Somewhere in the evening of music and companionship, he had found his way back to genuine laughter, the very thing he had asked for all those months ago. "It seems you fulfilled your end of our bargain after all, Mrs. Rivera." Sophia tilted her head questioningly. "You've made me laugh," he explained. "Really laugh." "So I have," she agreed with a smile. "Does that mean our arrangement is concluded?" Harold felt a sudden unease at the thought. "Do you want it to be?" "Not particularly," she admitted. "I've grown rather fond of our evenings together." "As have I," Harold said, surprised by how much he meant it. "Perhaps we could continue, not as employer and employee, but as friends?" The word felt strange on his tongue, but right somehow. Sophia's smile deepened. "I'd like that very much, Mr. Bennet." "Harold," he corrected her. "I think after all this time you might call me Harold." "Harold," she repeated softly, "and I'm Sophia." Something shifted between them in that simple exchange of names, a final barrier falling away, opening the door to whatever might come next. Spring came early that year, bringing with it a renewed sense of life to the once somber mansion. The gardens burst into bloom under the attentive care of the gardeners, who now worked with enthusiasm rather than mere obligation. The windows stood open on pleasant days, allowing fresh air and birdsong to filter through rooms that had been closed off for too long. And music. There was always music now. Sometimes it was Sophia playing alone in the early mornings, her skilled fingers bringing the grand piano to life. Sometimes it was Harold's more hesitant but increasingly confident practice sessions. And 3 evenings a week, without fail, they played together, Sophia teaching, Harold learning, both of them finding unexpected joy in the process. The household staff had grown accustomed to the changes in their employer. The fearsome Mr. Bennet of old had been replaced by a man who remembered their birthdays, asked about their families, and occasionally joined them for coffee in the kitchen. It was as if the music had not only awakened his dormant capacity for joy, but had reminded him of his fundamental humanity. On a particularly beautiful morning in early May, Harold was enjoying breakfast on the terrace when Sophia approached, holding a letter with a look of barely contained excitement. "Good morning." Harold greeted her, noting her expression. You look like someone with news. Sophia handed him the envelope. This came for me yesterday. I wanted to wait until the right moment to discuss it with you. Harold took the envelope, noting the official-looking letterhead from the Wellington Academy of Music. He read the contents quickly, then looked up at Sophia with genuine pleasure. They've offered you a teaching position, he said. Sophia, that's wonderful. It's part-time to start, she explained, taking a seat across from him at his gesture. 3 days a week teaching piano to intermediate students. The pay isn't spectacular, but it's a foot in the door. Harold finished for her. A chance to return to the world you belonged in before life intervened. Sophia nodded, her eyes bright. Exactly. After our holiday performance, I sent them a recording of me playing. I never expected them to respond so quickly. Harold felt a complex mix of emotions. Happiness for Sophia, certainly, but also a surprising pang at the thought of how their comfortable routine would change. When do they want you to start? That's the thing, Sophia said, hesitation creeping into her voice. They'd like me to begin next month. I'd need to reduce my hours here, of course. I've thought about how we might adjust the household schedule to accommodate. Sophia, Harold interrupted gently. You don't need to worry about that. Of course, you must take this position. But my responsibilities here can be managed, he assured her. We'll hire additional help if necessary. This opportunity is too important to pass up. Relief washed over her face. Thank you, Harold. I was worried you might be disappointed. Disappointed? Why would I be disappointed to see a friend achieve something they've dreamed of? The words were sincere, though Harold couldn't quite suppress the selfish wish that nothing would change. Sophia studied him carefully. Our evening sessions will continue whenever your schedule permits, Harold said firmly. I'm not letting my piano teacher escape that easily. I've only just mastered Für Elise, after all. The tension in Sophia's shoulders eased. I was hoping you'd say that. Did you really think I wouldn't support this? Harold asked, genuinely curious. Sophia considered her answer carefully. The man I met when I first came to work here might have seen only how this inconvenienced him, but that man is long gone. She smiled warmly. I'm grateful to know this version of Harold Bennett instead. Harold felt a flush of shame at the truth of her words, followed by gratitude for her honesty. As am I, he said quietly. The following weeks were a flurry of preparation. Harold insisted on having Sophia's teaching wardrobe updated. An investment in your professional future, he called it when she protested. He also surprised her by converting a rarely used sitting room into a small music studio where she could prepare lessons and practice without distraction. This is too much, Sophia said when he showed her the completed room, complete with a baby grand piano he'd had delivered from the city's finest instrument shop. Nonsense, Harold replied. Consider it a long overdue bonus for putting up with me all these years. Sophia laughed, that warm, genuine laugh he had come to treasure. You weren't so bad. We both know that's not true, Harold said wryly, but I appreciate the kindness of your selective memory. As Sophia's start date at the academy approached, Harold noticed her growing more thoughtful, almost pensive at times. One evening after their regular music session, he finally asked what was troubling her. I've been thinking about something, she admitted, organizing her sheet music with unnecessary precision. A possibility that I'm not sure how to propose. Harold settled into his favorite armchair. I'm listening. Sophia took a deep breath. The academy has a student scholarship program, but it's woefully underfunded. Many talented children can't afford proper musical education, especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds. Harold nodded, beginning to see where this was heading. I was in a similar position once, Sophia continued. If not for a scholarship from a local music lover, I would never have had lessons beyond what my public school offered. You'd like me to contribute to the scholarship fund, Harold surmised. Actually, I was thinking of something more substantial, Sophia met his eyes directly. What would you think about establishing a foundation? Something in Eleanor's name, perhaps. She loved music so much, and she always talked about the importance of making arts education accessible to everyone. Harold sat very still, struck by how perfectly the suggestion aligned with Eleanor's values. She had often spoken of using their wealth more meaningfully, of creating a legacy beyond business success. A foundation, he repeated, the idea taking root. Funding music education for children who couldn't otherwise afford it. Sophia nodded eagerly. The academy would be just the beginning. There are community programs, after-school initiatives, instrument donation drives. You've given this some thought, Harold observed with a smile. More than some, Sophia admitted. I've actually drafted a preliminary proposal. She retrieved a folder from her bag and handed it to him. Feel free to look it over when you have time. There's no pressure, it was just an idea. But as Harold skimmed the carefully prepared document, he felt a growing certainty. This was right. This was important. This was exactly what Eleanor would have wanted. We'll need office space, he said thoughtfully. And staff. Someone to oversee day-to-day operations while you're teaching. Sophia blinked in surprise. You mean? I mean, yes, Harold said simply. Let's do it. The Eleanor Bennett Music Foundation has a nice ring to it, don't you think? The joy that bloomed on Sophia's face was worth every penny the foundation would cost him. It's perfect, she whispered. The next 6 months passed in a whirlwind of activity. Establishing the foundation required legal work, financial planning, and countless meetings. Harold threw himself into the project with the same energy and focus that had built his business empire. But this time, the work filled him with a different kind of satisfaction. Not the cold pride of accumulating wealth, but the warm fulfillment of creating something meaningful. Sophia balanced her new teaching position with advising on the foundation's programs. Her first-hand experience, both as a scholarship recipient and as an educator, made her insight invaluable. Together, they crafted something that honored Eleanor's memory while looking firmly toward the future. On a crisp October evening, exactly 1 year after Harold had fired his last piano tutor and made his fateful request to Sophia, the Eleanor Bennett Music Foundation held its official opening reception. The venue was the Wellington Academy's main concert hall, filled with potential donors, educators, community leaders, and, most importantly to Harold, the first group of scholarship recipients and their families. Harold stood at the podium, looking out at the gathering. He spotted Sophia in the front row, dressed elegantly in a blue dress that brought out the silver in her hair. She nodded encouragingly as he cleared his throat to speak. My late wife Eleanor once told me that music was the purest form of communication, he began. When words fail, when emotions overwhelm, music speaks. For too long after her passing, I closed my ears to that language, thinking the conversation was over. He paused, gathering himself. I was wrong. Thanks to a remarkable woman who had the courage to remind me that it's never too late to learn something new, I rediscovered not just music, but connection, purpose, and yes, even laughter. Smiles spread through the audience as Harold continued, sharing the story of his journey from grief to renewal, and how a simple request to hear something that would make him laugh had led to this moment. The Eleanor Bennett Music Foundation exists to ensure that no child with the desire to learn music will be denied that opportunity due to financial circumstances, he explained. Every child deserves the chance to discover their voice, whether through piano, violin, voice, or any other instrument that calls to them. As he concluded his remarks, Harold made an announcement that surprised everyone, including Sophia. And, now to officially launch our foundation, I've prepared a small musical offering. I ask for your indulgence as I am very much still a student myself. A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd as Harold moved to the grand piano at center stage. He caught Sophia's wide-eyed look of astonishment and gave her a small wink before sitting at the bench. This piece is called Beginning Again, he said into the microphone. It was composed by the Foundation's artistic director, Sophia Rivera, and it seems fitting to share it with you tonight. Harold placed his hands on the keys and began to play. The piece was simplified from Sophia's original composition, adapted for his still developing skills, but the essential melody remained, the story of loss and renewal translated into music. His performance wasn't perfect. There were hesitations, a few missed notes, moments of uncertainty,